Hi, I am Mrs. Sloan, and this is a video for my honors biology students. This is video 2 on the cardiovascular system. So in video 1, and I'm going to go ahead and present here. In video 1, we already discussed there we go. The different types of blood vessels, arteries, veins, and capillaries. We also discussed the structures of the heart and the pulse. So if that's what you need, go watch video 1. Here in video 2, we're going to focus on the vascular pathways. We're going to look at blood, the components of blood, and we're going to look at some cardiovascular disorders. All right, so the notes are down in the descriptor of the video. That's what my students use, 2 column notes. Column 1 is scaffolding. I'll help you fill that in. And column 2, I encourage my students to put pictures in. So for us, we are starting at 12.3 in the notes. So this would be vascular pathways. All right. So this is a very crude diagram, but it works. Okay, so let's take a look. Remember when we studied the structure of the heart and the right and the left side of the heart? So the left atrium is getting blood from the lungs, so it's oxygenated. It goes down to the left ventricle, up and out to your systemic, everywhere but your lungs, everywhere in your body. You're going to drop off oxygen, and you're going to pick up CO2, and then you're going to return back to the heart via the right atrium. And then the blood goes down to the right ventricle, and then this deoxygenated blood needs to go to the lungs, and then it comes back oxygenated. Remember, the definition of an artery is arteries go away from the heart, veins go towards. So whenever you leave the heart, whether you're leaving via the left ventricle and you're going to leave via the aorta, the largest artery of the body, or you're leaving the right ventricle of the heart, you're going to go to the pulmonary arteries carrying this deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Let me show you another picture. All right, so here's that picture of that heart. So let's take a look at this again. Here's the right side of our heart. Remember, it's on you or on your patient. This is the right atrium. This is the right ventricle. So when this blood is coming from the body via the superior and inferior vena cava, video 1, if you want to learn the parts of the heart, we already did that. When it leaves the right ventricle, it goes up and out through a semilunar valve, right? Up and out the left and right pulmonary arteries going away from the heart. And there at the lungs, there's little teeny tiny microscopic air sacs called alveoli, and the capillaries surround them. They're going to drop off the CO2, pick up the oxygen, and they're going to return via the left and the right pulmonary veins, because veins go towards the heart, into the left atrium, down into the left ventricle. Left ventricle, the biggest, strongest part of your heart, is going to contract and send blood out your aorta, right, up into your brain, down in the rest of your body. And there are those capillaries. You're going to drop off that oxygen. You're going to pick up some CO2 and come back into the right atrium. So on your notes, when you look at the vascular pathways, the pulmonary circuit is heart, lungs, heart. That's the pulmonary circuit. So and in that, the arteries carry deoxygenated blood because they're going away, right? Going away from the heart with deoxygenated blood. That's what you need in your notes. And number 2, you have exchange of gases at the capillaries that are surrounding the alveoli of the lungs. And then when it returns in the pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood. This blood is coming back from the lungs, going towards the heart. Any vessel that goes towards the heart is a vein carrying oxygenated blood. In the systemic circuit, it starts with the aorta. So the aorta leaves, this is the left ventricle. This is your aorta right here. It starts with the aorta and then arteries carrying oxygenated blood. Number 2, exchange of gases, nutrients, and waste at the capillaries of the tissues. So you need the word nutrients, right? And the systemic veins, so your veins going back toward your heart are going to carry deoxygenated blood, So the pulmonary circuit, let me see if I can make myself bigger here. Okay, so we learned this in video 1. Arteries go away from the heart, veins go towards. Arteries, arterioles, capillaries in the middle where all exchange occurs, venules, veins. And then it goes heart, right? And this is a circuit, so it can go either way, right? It can go heart, body, heart, lungs. Heart, body, heart, lungs. And you could say heart, systemic, heart, pulmonary. Heart, systemic, heart, pulmonary. Okay, so it's this continuous circuit. All right. Now, next, when you hear about a coronary circuit, this is part of the systemic circuit. It's underneath that umbrella. Anywhere, right? Only the lungs are pulmonary circuit. Everything else is systemic circuit. These are the specific arteries that feed your heart. This is really important because, right, your heart is a muscle, the cardiac muscle, and it's going to need oxygen. It's going to need nutrients to keep beating. That's why you don't want to have anything in here blocking your coronary arteries, because if this muscle doesn't get any oxygen, it's going to stop beating, and that's bad. Okay, and there you can see the cardiac vein. So coronary circuit serves the heart muscle, Now, there are 3 places in your body where there's a little twist. Instead of going arteries, arterioles, capillaries in the middle, venules, veins, there's actually 2 sets of capillaries. And I'm going to show you one of those right now. So here you can see oxygenated blood. This is your aorta turning right here. Here's your aorta coming down. And this is going to pass through your digestive tract. Now, if you just ate a meal, then when your blood passes around the capillaries of your small intestines where most of your nutrients are absorbed, it's going to go to, sugar level or protein level. It's all going to raise up really high. And if you brought that back and put it all throughout your body, it could throw you out of homeostasis. So this amazing thing that your blood does is it uses this right here. It's called your hepatic-portal vein. And it takes all the blood from the small intestines and it passes it through the liver. And when it gets to the liver, if it's really high in nutrients, the liver will take those excess nutrients out and store them. Okay. And if the liver is all full of nutrients, it'll convert it to fat and store that. Okay. But if the blood coming from the small intestines, because you haven't eaten in a while, is low in nutrients, then it'll put some nutrients back into your blood. So your blood always leaves your hepatic vein. Anything with the liver is hepatic. When it leaves your hepatic vein, it always leaves slightly elevated. Now, what I don't like about this picture and almost every single picture that shows the liver is what's the problem here? It looks like only deoxygenated blood is coming here, right? Because it's coming from the small intestines. But what they're not showing is a branch off the aorta called the hepatic artery, which is bringing oxygenated blood to the liver. They're just not showing it in this picture. But if I could, I would draw another artery right there. So on the portal system, it takes blood from the small intestines, and the word you need is directly to the liver, bypassing the pulmonary circuit. It doesn't return right away. It goes to the liver. The purpose is blood nutrient regulation. Blood nutrient regulation, right? What are we about in this unit? Homeostasis, baby. So there's 2 sets of capillary beds. The first set is in the intestines and the second is in the liver. So those are double capillaries. Okay, great. Let's keep going. So let's talk about how blood flows. All right. So the force on the blood due to the heart, okay? The heart contracts to send the blood, right? The ventricles either sending it to the lungs or to the systemic circuit. So the greatest force is going to be leaving your aorta, right? If you had a slice in your aorta, really, really bad, right? As opposed to a slice in a vein on your finger is not a big deal, right? So here, when we look at blood pressure, follow this line right here. Let me get a pointer. Okay, follow this line right here. You can see the blood pressure is surging up and down, and then it goes smooth. Why? Because you're going to have the greatest pressure closest to the aorta, closest to the heart. And I'm talking about your systemic circuit, but I'm also talking about your pulmonary circuit, right? Greatest force right when it leaves the heart, up and down, up and down, up and down, and then it goes here. Blood is always going to travel from a higher pressure to a lower pressure. So it's starting here, and the lowest pressure of all is the vena cava when it re-enters the heart. So now velocity is going to match that a little bit. Okay, the velocity goes up and down due to the blood pressure, but you can see here the velocity goes way down. And where is it going down at? right here at the capillaries. I want you to think about like a raging river. So there's one raging river, and then it splits into two, and then each of those split, and each of those split, and each of those split. And what's going to happen is that water is going to come across more surface area, and that's going to provide resistance, and it's going to slow it down. So when your blood moves the slowest is at the capillaries, because that is where you have the greatest surface area. That's what this is measuring, is cross-sectional area. Here is just your aorta, and here it's just your superior and inferior vena cava. Where you have the greatest surface area is right here at the capillary beds. And that is awesome. That is awesome because that's when the blood is going to move the slowest, that allows for all of that exchange to take place there. Okay, so it's going to be, when you look at surface area, it's low, and then highest surface area of the capillaries. And then remember, those capillaries are going to start coming together in venules and then veins, and then your superior and inferior vena cava. Now your velocity, though, it's going to be fast at first because it's close to the heart. It's going to slow down as it moves through the capillaries, but just like rivers coming together and coming together and coming together back into one main river, it's going to start to pick up speed because there is less resistance. All right, so on your note, you have blood flow in 12.4, arteries, due to the blood flows through the arteries due to the force on the blood due to the heart, okay, by the heart. The blood pressure falls the farther the distance from the heart. The blood pressure falls the farther the distance from the heart, all right? Now, capillaries is where all the exchange as a result of two opposing pressures. So I'm going to go over those pressures with you. So we're going to talk about what happens right here at the capillaries, okay? Now, at the capillary bed, here's your capillary bed. Here is an arterial, artery, arterioles, capillaries in the middle. Then you have venules and you have veins, all right? Now, here in the middle of this capillary bed, you're seeing lymphatic capillaries. That has to do with your lymphatic system. And what its job is to do is to pick up any excess tissue fluid that is surrounding these cells. It gets put into these lymphatic ducts. They get brought back through lymph nodes where you have your lymphatics, your T cells and your B cells are checking to see if there's any infection, and then they'll return that video. Sorry, it's late and I'm tired. It'll return that blood to the vein. You have your subclavian veins right here, so that fluid will get returned. I'm going to talk to you all about that in our next chapter when we learn about the lymphatic system. So put a pin in that, but for right now, you just know that it picks up any excess tissue fluid. Now, where do you think your blood pressure is going to be the highest? Is it going to be highest on the arterial end of the capillary or on the venular end of the capillary? Well, what did we learn? When it's closest to the heart here, right, leaving the heart, this is going to be the highest pressure, and this is going to be the lowest pressure as it moves across that capillary bed. So when we compare, here's your arterial end of the capillary bed, here's your venular end of the capillary bed. Here is your blood pressure is referred to as your hydrostatic pressure. That's the force on the blood due to the heart. It's going to be high, and then the farther it goes through the capillary bed towards the venule, it's going to drop. Now, there's another pressure that's called your osmotic pressure. Remember osmosis? Osmosis is diffusion of water across a semi-permeable membrane. Water must flow from the hypo, so it flows from the hypotonic to the hypertonic. This osmotic pressure is pretty constant throughout your capillary bed. It's due to all the salts and all the nutrients and all the dissolved substances, hormones, and vitamins in your blood. So it's pretty constant. But here at the arterial end, your blood pressure forcing fluids out of your capillaries. Remember, this is where all exchange takes place. Your capillaries are only one cell thick. The hydrostatic pressure, do you see how it's greater than the osmotic pressure? So at the arterial end, it's forcing fluids out. But by the time you get to the venular end, the blood pressure has dropped below the osmotic pressure. And as a result of that, the osmotic pressure is saying, come in. Why is that amazing? Because here, where you have oxygen and nutrients, they are forced out of your blood vessels and into your tissue fluid so your cells can get it. But by the time you get to the venular end, you're picking up the waste and you're picking up the CO2 because the return is happening. Let me show you another chart for that. Okay, so here's an arterial. Okay, here's your capillary. Here's your venular end. Okay, so here at the arterial end, the greatest pressure is the hydrostatic pressure. So water and oxygen, amino acids, glucose, they're all going out to feed these cells. And so it's going out into the tissue fluid, which will then go into the cells. But by the time you get to the venule end, the blood pressure has dropped, the hydrostatic pressure has dropped, and the osmotic pressure is saying, come in, come in. And what is it bringing back in? Carbon dioxide and waste. So on your notes, underneath number 2, capillaries, hydrostatic pressure is the force on the blood due to the heart. It's forcing things out due to the heart, stronger at the arterial end of the capillaries, forcing nutrients and oxygen out. Whereas here at the venule end, the osmotic pressure saying come in due to the contents of the capillaries is stronger than the hydrostatic pressure at the venule end of the capillaries, and it draws waste and carbon dioxide in. All right, good. Now, let's talk about veins. Okay, so veins are on the return. They don't have the same kind of pressure on that blood as you do in an artery. And so think about it. You've got, blood in your toes right now that's got to get all the way back up and into your heart. And what's gravity going to say? It's going to be saying, go down, blood. So one of the wonderful benefits of your veins, there's these valves, these one-way valves. So what happens is this. And we talked a little bit about this in video 1. You have your muscles around your veins, and when they contract, they compress a vein and squeeze it. And so the blood can only move in one direction. And so that direction is up towards your heart. So every time those muscles contract, they are pushing against it, and it's a smaller space. So the blood has to go somewhere, and it can only move in one direction because of these valves. So veins, blood flow due to skeletal muscle contractions pushing on venule walls, valves, and like your breathing movement. That helps too. The change in pressure also helps. Okay, but focus on the valves. Now, what happens if a valve breaks? Well, that's a super bummer. Okay, then you get varicose veins and you get swelling because the valve is like, boom. And then the next valve is holding two sections worth. And then it's like, I can't do it. And it breaks. And then you get these swellings. Okay. And that's what a varicose vein is. And they can be little spider ones, or they can be really large ones. And that's because what happened is this valve busted. And so that next chamber down is holding even more. So varicose veins are when valves become weak and ineffective. And if you've ever heard of hemorrhoids or preparation H, what all hemorrhoids are varicose veins in your rectum. Now, avert your eyes. I'll tell you when to come back, okay? But these are all examples of different kinds of hemorrhoids, all right? Okay, you can come back now. So hemorrhoids are varicose veins in the rectum. All right, our next topic is blood. What is in the blood? So let's talk about that. So when you look at blood, yes, there are red blood cells there for sure, okay? But if you put some blood in a centrifuge and would spin it really fast, all the formed and heavier elements would go to the bottom. So about 45% of it is red blood cells. Then you've got some white blood cells and platelets, and then the liquid portion, which is plasma. Now this plasma, which is 50 to 55% of your blood, this is mostly water. And let me show you what I mean. Okay, so plasma is 90 to 92% water. So on your notes, blood contents, you have formed elements in plasma, which is over 90% water. Plasma contains dissolved. Let me tell you what's dissolved in that water. Proteins, salts, gases, nutrients, nitrogenous waste, hormones, and vitamins. So what you want to do is you want to jot all of those down. And if you need to hit pause on the video, write those all down. I tell my students, and I'll talk to you a little more about it in class, but think about a road trip. If you're going to go on a road trip, sometimes you have to stop and get gas, right? And then when you stop and get gas, you might go into like the convenience part of the gas station, go get some nutrients. Those nutrients could be good for you, like proteins or maybe salts. And then you usually have to go to the bathroom. And then that would be a good time for you to take your hormones and vitamins. I don't know. I can't help you on that. That one I'm going to talk to you about in class. Okay, but write those contents down. Gases, nutrients, salts, proteins, waste, hormones, and vitamins. All right. That's the liquid part, mostly water. The formed elements, you have red blood cells, you have white blood cells, and you have platelets. So mostly red blood cells. So the job of red blood cells, is to carry oxygen. So how do they do that? Okay. Well, inside the red blood cells, and by the time you're at a capillary, red blood cells, the capillaries are so narrow, red blood cells have to go through single file. And keep in mind what's going on here at this capillary, right? You have combating hydrostatic and osmotic pressure. At the arterial end of the capillary bed, hydrostatic pressure is going to be greater, and oxygen and nutrients are going to be leaving. And at the venule end, osmotic pressure will be greater, and CO2 and waste will be coming back in. But each one of these red blood cells contains 250 million molecules of hemoglobin in them. Okay, and that's why we need to have a red blood cell, because we need all those molecules of hemoglobin to be contained. Otherwise, that would throw off homeostasis incredibly, right, by osmosis. So we need to have it packaged within a red blood cell. Each one of those hemoglobin molecules can carry on each of its iron right here, molecules here, the heme group can carry an O2. So since we have, each red blood cell has 250 million molecules of hemoglobin, and each can carry 4 molecules of oxygen. If you multiply by 4, that's 1 billion molecules of O2 in each red blood cell, generally speaking. So red blood cells contain hemoglobin and functions in oxygen transport. And then where do our red blood cells and our white blood cells come from? Well, you have blood stem cells in your bone marrow. This is in your bone marrow. You have lymphoid stem cells, which are eventually going to form your B and T lymphocytes and natural killer cells. And these are your special forces. We'll learn about those next chapter. Your myeloid stem cells, some can form red blood cells. This is also where your platelets come from. And then these are your other white blood cells. We'll be talking about those later. So you have stem cells in your red bone marrow to produce these. White blood cells, their function is to protect your body from invasion by foreign substances and organisms, or if your own cells go bad too, right? Protects the body from invasion. Now, some can be phagocytic. Their job is to engulf and eat. So you have that on your notes. Others can produce antibodies. B lymphocytes will mature into plasma cells that generate antibodies. So that's what else you need. And then others do cell-to-cell combat. T cells and natural killer cells do cell-to-cell combat. And we're going to learn all about that next chapter. All right, and here you can see a white blood cell. This is a macrophage, and it's literally eating bacteria. Okay, all right. Next, let's talk about what happens when a blood vessel breaks, right? When you have a bruise, then you've had broken blood vessels under the skin. It's contained, and it's discoloration due to that blood out in your tissues that you can see through your skin. If you have a cut on the surface, right, then you would bleed. You would, maybe you need to just put a Band-Aid, or maybe you need stitches on that. But the process is the same. When there is a damaged blood vessel, okay, what happens is platelets congregate around that damaged tissue, and what they're trying to do is block the hole, right, of that damage. So what happens is the platelets in those damaged tissues, and this is an abridged, a very short version. It's like this triggers this, triggers this, triggers this, these different clotting factors. And what's going to happen is what you end up generating from a result of this are these fibrin threads. And these fibers go across the wound with those platelets and block it. Now, these are just little fibrin threads and platelets. So if this is a major artery that you cut, it doesn't care. It's going to blow right through. And that's why you might need to get stitches or a butterfly bandage or some glue. So platelets, there are over 12 different clotting factors that work with platelets. Okay, hemophilia is if you're missing one of those clotting factors. Process, platelets at the wound and with damaged tissue start enzymatic process ending with fibrin threads forming a framework for the clot. Fibrin threads forming a framework for the clot. And that's why you might apply pressure initially on a wound, okay, because you're giving it a chance to build up those fibrin threads so it can withstand whatever, hydrostatic pressure is coming at it. Hemophilia is an inherited clotting disorder caused by a deficiency in a clotting factor, So here you can see those fibrin threads, and then the red blood cells can get stuck in there, and then you can form that clot. All right. Now, our last topic is cardiovascular disorders. Make good choices. So let's talk. Don't do this. Don't eat, fat's not a bad, fat is a good source of nutrients for you, but trans fats are not good food. You want to eat real cheese, not fake cheese, right? If you can, right? Definitely don't smoke. Okay. That's for sure bad. And this also makes you COVID bait as well. So does this. Okay. We don't want to be obese because what happens is the fat has to go somewhere in our body if we have too much of it, right? And then it can clog our blood vessels. And when that happens, right, if we eat too many calories and that clogs our blood vessels, it makes it harder for our blood vessels to function. And in fact, if you take, let me change this right here. Okay. So if blood's trying to move through this diameter, right? Okay. That's a lot of diameter. There's not as much resistance. But then if the diameter gets smaller, okay, and it's trying to move the same amount of blood through the smaller diameter, it becomes more difficult. And if we clog them even more, so this is all that the blood can flow through, then what happens is your blood pressure keeps increasing. And that's what hypertension is. Hypertension is high blood pressure. And why is that happening? Because your blood, and this is called atherosclerosis, when you have your diameter of your blood vessels is getting smaller where the blood can flow through because it's clogged with cholesterol. And then if this gets damaged at all, then you form a blood clot in it, and this blood clot could block it, or it could get loose and cause a stroke. If it's in your heart, it's not going to feed your heart cells. So that's why we want to have a healthy weight and eat healthy foods. And to the best of our ability, though I know it's difficult, if you go into a grocery store, it's the edges of the grocery store that has the food that can decay. That's the healthy stuff, right? The stuff like a Twinkie that can last for 5 years, that is not the healthy food, right? That's the fun food. You can have it every once in a while, right? But you want to eat the healthy food, the meats and the vegetables and the fresh food around the edges of your grocery store. Because what you don't want to have is have a stent placed in your blood vessels because they're clogged, right? You don't want to have that happen. So atherosclerosis, and I had that here, atherosclerosis, that is plaque buildup on arterial walls. Now, what else can happen? Well, you could have a build up a clot inside a blood vessel. You could have a blocked or damaged blood vessel, and then you have a portion of your brain that does not receive oxygen. That part of your brain will die. Okay. And when part of your brain dies, that is called a stroke. So a stroke, a portion of the brain dies due to blood clot or a vessel burst. Okay. Now, if your heart, a heart attack is basically a muscle cramp in your heart. And so if you have a portion of your coronary circuit that gets blocked, this is very painful here in the heart. And so as a result of that, this heart muscle dies. So a heart attack is a blood clot in the coronary artery, a blood clot in a coronary artery. And then an aneurysm. Oh, sorry, not quite there. This, is what they might do. They might go harvest a vein from one part of your body and stitch it here to your aorta to go around the clot. This would be called a triple bypass, right? Because they have 3 bypasses. If they only had 2, it would be a double bypass, right? You don't want to have that happen. Okay, and the last one here is an aneurysm. An aneurysm is when, and this could be due to hypertension and high blood pressure, that could be due to atherosclerosis, right? So it can push against a blood vessel wall and at such great pressure that it starts to weaken it, and then it bursts. So an aneurysm is a ballooning of blood vessels, So, right? So want to eat healthy, we want to exercise, right? And take care of this heart, right? It's the only one we got. And if you are one of my students, I will see you in class.